All right, welcome everyone again to the decision call. Really excited to have you on here and to welcome you to this hour-long session. Before we get started, I want you to all take a moment to think about what you want out of this, because there's going to be plenty of time for Q&A, and we want you to be able to leave this conversation with any questions answered. I know some of you have submitted some questions ahead of time. I'll be asking those questions or answering them during a presentation or individually if it's more of an individual question. But feel free to use that the Q&A feature, because we are excited to answer your questions at the end of this. So like I said, by the end of this conversation, you should have the information you need to make a really informed decision about your Venture for America offer. While we'd be really excited to have you in our class of 2021 and in our community, ultimately that decision is up to you, and we want to make sure that you're feeling excited about whatever you choose, whether that's VFA or not. So this is what we're going to go through. We're going to go through some quick introductions and a welcome. We're going to then go through a VFA refresher, as well as our COVID-19 response over the past year and what we're continuing to do as the pandemic is still with us. I'll go over onboarding and Match and what you'll need to do in order to get access to the Match platform ahead of the Match process starting for all the incoming fellows, regardless of those of you on this call or those that got accepted way back in October, and what they need to do to get access and start that process. We'll do a quick roundtable of questions that I prepared for the fellows and alums on this panel, and then we'll do a Q&A as well. So with that, let's do some quick introductions. I don't think you all know me yet. You've obviously received an email from me, but my name is Winston. I'm a Detroit 2016 alum. I take he, him pronouns, and currently on the Venture for America team, I work as senior talent manager. And what really that means is I help people make their decisions with their offers. And then what I do is I help prepare people for the match process as well. I'll then pass it off to Riel, and then we'll go from there.
Hey y'all, I'm Riel Snorton. I'm the Senior Talent Associate here at Venture for America. You have probably seen or at least heard my voice on many of the webinars. You attended any of them prior to this point. So for some of you, nice seeing you again. For some other of you, welcome to possibly becoming part of the VFA community.
Thanks, Riel. Yes, a familiar face, and I'm excited to have you on here too. Jeff, are you on the line?
I'm on the line.
Hi, Jeff. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Jeff Stern. I am a 2016 fellow. I spent my fellowship time in Cleveland, Ohio, working for a startup there focused on building election infrastructure. I've since moved on from that and co-founded another company based in Cleveland, Ohio after the fellowship, and have been working on that for the last almost 2 years now.
Thanks, Jeff, for sharing. And it's great to have you on here and to share your experience as an alum with a bit of experience and someone who stayed in Cleveland. Thank you for joining.
Absolutely.
All right, so moving on, staying in Cleveland, I would love to have Manisha, if you could introduce yourself as well.
Yeah, of course. Hi, everyone. My name is Manisha. I am also a Cleveland VFA alum. Love the city. I'm unfortunately not there anymore, but I'm hoping to go back as soon as it's safe to. I graduated recently. I was a 2018 fellow, and I was working at a startup that was focusing on sports ticketing infrastructure. And I now currently work at a fully remote team at Instantish, which is also a software company, and yeah, as a product manager. So excited to kind of talk about my experience with that.
Thanks, Manisha. And last but really not least, we have a 2020 fellow. And why don't you introduce yourself?
Thanks, Winston. Hi, everyone. My name is Adriana, and I am a recent college grad. I went to Williams, where I studied political science, and am a 2020 fellow in Philly. And I work at an ed tech startup called Campus ESP, and I do customer success. I work as a customer success manager there. Very excited to be here.
Thank you, Adriana. And For those of you on the call, Adriana was in your shoes basically a year ago. We were talking about that right before the webinar started. So she knows what it's like to be going into the job market in the middle of a recession and a pandemic. So happy to share all of our experiences with that as well. So thank you all for that introduction. We're going to do a quick VFA refresher. I love to start any webinar that I do for people who are thinking about VFA with just a grounding in our mission, which is to create economic opportunities in American cities, the 13 ones that we work in, by mobilizing all of you on this call by equipping you with the skills and resources that you need to create jobs. That is why we exist as a community. That is something that we all subscribe to and something that we believe in and want to push forward. In terms of why you should join VFA, I know that there's a question out there about why you shouldn't join VFA. Love to answer that question later as well. But there's so many things that you get from being a fellow. First, you get to participate in our month-long training camp program, which I'll talk a little bit more about. That is geared to help you become a really great startup employee with some general skills, as well as to hone your ability to be an entrepreneur. We also provide a lot of continuing learning and support during your time as a fellow, whether that is a networking program that we're launching very soon for our 2019 and 2020 fellows, to at the year mark, we invite all our fellows back to do trainings on negotiation and managing people and things that you need to further grow in your career. We also have resource and affinity groups for our fellows. So almost every identity is covered, and it's just a smaller community and space for fellows to connect based on shared experiences in the world of startups and entrepreneurship. We also have an incredible network of more than 1,200 fellows and alums that you can tap into. Maybe one of them will be your co-founders. Maybe you'll hire them in the future. Maybe you'll work for a fellow founding company. The network is growing and it is active and vibrant. We also have a lot of founder resources. So if you are someone who finishes the program, you can apply to our 4-month-long accelerator program. That's an opportunity for you to really work on your own business and take it to the next level. Our alums who've done our accelerator program, which is really for like pre-seed stage companies, have gone off to really succeed in their companies, do accelerator programs like Y Combinator, Techstars, Yulitsa, who you're seeing on here recently, sold out of all of her toys from her company Healthy Read Stalls at Target, and is really growing her company and hiring people as well. And finally, you get to be a part of the mission and create an impact in our cities. However that's defined, it's not a requirement, but fellows tend to be pretty involved in the local community in a really wide variety of ways. So that's why we believe you should join VFA. All right, and now for a big question, which is, what is VFA's response to COVID? Well, this has been the program experience for our 2020 fellows and 2018 and 2019 fellows. And that is by January 2020, almost every single one of our 2020 fellows, including Adriana, had accepted full-time positions. And about 80% of the fellows believe that training camp was a really great or life-changing experience, which is basically the same as our 2019 fellows who attended the in-person training camp. Of course, there are trade-offs, and we can talk about that as well. But we believe we were able to deliver as best of an experience as possible in a virtual format. And then for our fellows last year, most of them retained their jobs during the pandemic, and we were able to support those that lost their jobs for a reason by coaching them and helping them to identify new opportunities. We don't ever just hand someone a new job, but are able to coach and guide someone along that transition process. All right, so this is what the 2021 fellowship will look like for you. So the match process will officially begin on April 19th. That is when, like I said, fellows from the October selection day all the way until our March selection day will start, as long as they meet our requirements that I'll talk about later on. And currently our community directors in our 13 cities are actively looking for great startup jobs for all of you. Training camp will be virtual this year and will be held from July 5th to July 30th. It is a full-time experience. The required hours are from 12 to 6 p.m. Eastern. And then there's some challenge time from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern or 10 to 12. And there's some flexibility on those things, but it is a full-time experience. So you won't be able to work a full-time job. And we do have need-based and application-based stipends that we'll be releasing in May. Job start dates are dependent on your company, but most fellows are starting their jobs in August. And then in terms of relocation, I know that there are some questions about, do I have to move? Like, I'm not as comfortable moving if I'm not vaccinated, and we get that. So right now, Venture for America has no in-person programming, but fellows are expected to follow your company's policy when it comes to where you have to locate. So if a company says you have to be in person in San Antonio, we can't really butt into a company's decision like that. So you would have to hopefully learn about their ethos and their policies around location and then follow that. If there is no policy at all and you can work remotely, fellows do have to move and relocate to their city within 45 days of VFA resuming in-person programming, whenever that is. There's no set date on that. We're just really making sure that it is safe for people to be in person again, and just don't know when that will be. And then the fellowship end date remains summer 2023 for your class as well. All right, so moving on from COVID-19, talking about the onboarding and match experience and process. So as soon as you sign your offer, I'll send you an email for you to complete an onboarding survey. And that's the first step to get started with the onboarding process. Once you do complete that, we will add you to a Google Classroom where you'll complete asynchronous content. There's a lot in there just because there's a lot that we believe you should do to have a great experience in the match process. So you'll have to do that. And then you'll also submit your resume and biography for review and feedback, because as I'll talk about later, they do have to meet VFA standards that are designed to make you shine your best and show your best self to the company partners. And then you'll also have opportunities to network with the broader VFA community and members of the VFA team. In terms of the match timeline, we are in March right now. Like I mentioned, match opens on April 19th. During the onboarding process, which will be quite abbreviated for everyone on this call. So you should really be expected, or you should expect to spend a lot of time working on this stuff, but you'll have about a month to do all of this. And then starting April 19th, if you're approved for the match portal, by that point, you can start to pitch opportunities at the companies that we have sourced for you. We'll also continue to add opportunities throughout May, June, and July. So if you don't have access on April 19th, it is not the end of the world. So here's how fellows will get access to match. And this is important because all fellows have to follow these requirements. So every 2021 fellow has to meet VFA standards, which we share with you. I won't get into the details right now, but you do have to submit your biography and your resume in order to get access to match. It typically takes about 2 weeks to get us to get feedback back to fellows. So we encourage you to submit it as soon as possible and in an alignment with the checklists and the content, and again, the rubrics that we provide, so that you can reduce the amount of resubmissions. It usually, most people need to resubmit their materials at least once. So that is something that everyone should keep in mind. And then for some other folks, you'll also be asked to participate in what we call a match simulation, where you do a practice pitch for a job and a mock interview for that job as well. So there are some of you who we identified in your application process as needing an extra boost. We believe you can shine a little bit brighter, and we believe that everyone can be coached on their interviewing skills. So we will require you, in addition to your resume and biography, to submit a pitch and complete a mock interview. The idea here is that you only get one opportunity really to show your best self with a company partner and land an interview. And we want to make sure that you have every possible opportunity to succeed. And the second group of people, if you identify as Black, Latinx, Native, or Indigenous, we invite you to submit a pitch for feedback and do a mock interview. It's not required unless you also are required to do it based on your application materials, but that's something that if you're not required to do that and you identify with those communities, you can participate in. And then for everyone else, unfortunately, we don't have capacity to, as our team, to do that match simulation for everyone. So that's something that we encourage you to do peer-to-peer, and there are instructions to do that with other 2021 fellows. And I can answer more questions about this, but I really wanted everyone on this call to get an understanding of what you need to do in a pretty quick timeline in order to get access to match, hopefully by April 19th. But again, if you don't get access by April 19th, it's not the end of the world. Here's the general role distribution of what's on the match platform from year to year. There are a lot of roles in operations and project management, about a fifth of the opportunities. And then the common roles, less ubiquitous, but still a lot of roles in sales, business development, other quote unquote roles that are about being an analyst or chief of staff or something a little bit more undefined or generalist role. Then marketing and software engineering. And one thing to note about software engineering roles is that you don't necessarily need to be a coder or to have studied computer science to apply for those opportunities. Some companies do want people that they can shape and grow as well into developers. On the rare side of things are account management, customer success roles, data analysis roles, finance roles, and product management opportunities. And then the roles that are really rare are the ones in UI UX design and technical, like materials, that type of engineering. And that is because most startups have a technical founder on their founding team, and they're less in need at an early stage of more junior level engineers. So I just wanted to share that with people. In terms of industry, most of a plurality of the companies are going to be software companies because it's really easy to write a line of code, much harder to create an entire supply chain for things. So you'll see a lot of software jobs. And then after that, healthcare, education, e-commerce are follow up in terms of industry distribution. You'll get a recording of this, so if you want to take a screenshot or pause it later on, that's totally fine. All right, now I want to really quickly show you what MATS looks like from your perspective as a fellow. So this is really a screenshot, but a look at what the MATS platform looks like. For someone, for example, if you're really interested in operations role and you're curious about St. Louis, you can apply filters, look for those opportunities. And one of those in a past year, a past MATS cycle would be a company called Launch Code in St. Louis. And if you're interested in that, you can click on the role and then you can see the job description. You should always do a little bit more research into a company before you write a pitch, but there will also be a button for you to send a pitch, which is how you actually apply to a company. They'll review that. They may or may not respond. They might say, not a good fit, or if they think you're a good fit, then they'll match with you and you'll set up an interview with them. All right, so enough of me talking about all of VFA. I really want an opportunity to highlight the fellows and alums on this call for everyone. And I'm seeing some questions come in already. So feel free to keep on sending questions because we want to answer them for you. And in this roundtable, I think I want to start off with a question around making the decision to join Venture for America, right? So when you get your offer to join VFA, it is not a typical offer letter. It doesn't give you a salary. It doesn't really give you anything, but it is a commitment to join VFA and a desire to be in our program for the full 2 years. How did you weigh the uncertainty of not knowing exactly where you're going to be with maybe other options that you have that actually had a job for you? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. And I know that we're all in the even numbered years and evenly spaced apart. So I know that might be a little bit fuzzier for you, but I'd love to hear your perspectives about how you actually made that choice, because I think a lot of people are thinking about that right now as well. Let's start off with Adriana, just because you're the most recent person to join VFA, and that'll give Manisha and Jeff a little bit of time to reflect and think.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'm trying to remember. Actually, I can really remember when I got my offer letter. I think I was doing a course in San Francisco. There was like a winter study course, and I was at like a Pete's coffee shop, which was actually really great. But yeah, and I got that letter, and it was just like such a surprising and like wonderful moment in general. So I really, really loved that and appreciated that moment, and kind of already had a feeling for like what I wanted to do and that I wanted to join VFA. But honestly, I think about like that uncertainty element. I think that was something that I was thinking about since the beginning of the whole process, when I was first even like applying, joining, like it was always at the forefront of my mind. And I think that comes a lot with just like background of who I am. So I'm identifying more with like a first generation, low income student. And so knowing that I wasn't going to have a safety net, like just being more cautious of what I was going to do after school was definitely like at the forefront of my mind. So I think startups are always inherently like risky in nature. And I think that's something that's always been transparent. But where I found a lot of comfort and like knew that this was something that I wanted to do and can do and was excited about was how much structure there was within VFA in general. So there was always structure from like the start throughout the process. And so honestly, it provided a safety net for me that I wouldn't have had otherwise. And so knowing that and like really understanding that really gave me the confidence to feel like this was a community I wanted to join and what I wanted to do for the next 2 years. It kind of balanced out what I weighed as like uncertainty. And so knowing that I had a community director, that I had a VFA team, really put things into perspective and made me feel comfortable.
Thank you for sharing and for sharing sort of your background. And yeah, I think what I think VFA does is helps to mitigate some of that risk and provide a lot of support in case something happens to your company or whatever. And it doesn't eliminate it. So I think that's really important. I think that you named that and that you share that. So thank you. Manisha, what about you? How did you think about the VFA offer and ultimately in making your decision? What advice might you have? Yeah.
Yeah, I really resonated with Adriana's sort of perspective and decision-making process. I feel like mine was very similar thematically. I think when deciding between an offer that is a lot more straightforward, like obviously with like the salary that and like a job and an experience like VFA, it's like definitely not apples to apples. And it made me really think a lot more about what my life is like beyond a job post college or post like whatever experience I would be coming from into VFA. And I think that was something that made me realize that it's not really where I work that is just important. It's also kind of how I'm going to be growing as a person in the next chapter of my life. Like, will I be surrounded by people who share the same values as me? Will I be able to build a sense of confidence in myself so I'll be ready for making decisions in the workplace, making decisions about my like personal growth and career after. And at the end of the day, I felt like VFA was really not just like a career development choice, but like a personal development choice. Being able to really put myself in a position where I can both learn to ask the right questions, but also have multiple people to go to get those answers. So yeah, that's kind of what I would say.
Yeah, I think that the personal development piece is, I think, an interesting thing, that it's more than just the job, but there's other aspects of VFA that can help you grow as an individual beyond just the job. And Jeff, let's end with you. I mean, now that both of us have had 5 years from when we were making all these decisions, not to make us feel old. 5 years is not a long time out of college, but would love to hear your thoughts now that you've had some distance and all the things that you're thinking about as well and how that's ended up for you.
Yeah, if I reflect on it, I think I was going through a lot of the same things. So just to add maybe something different that I was also thinking about at the time was I knew I was interested in working at a startup. And something very tangible that VFA offers that frankly you don't get anywhere else is the connections to the startups. Like finding a job at a startup is really hard. And the likelihood that I would have been able to connect with the founder of my company when I was going through the match process as the first employee at a company, 0 if it was not through Venture for America. Because if you're trying to join a startup at that stage of its life, the CEO or the founder, there's no HR, there's no people operations, there's no recruiting budget. Their means of connecting with people who are interested in joining those companies is very limited. And so really just from a hard benefit perspective, VFA offers this connection to all these startups in addition to everything that Adriana and Manisha mentions as well.
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, I think that's a key point. I think the match process can be stressful, I was certainly stressed during it. And I think most fellows who go through it are, but it is just an opportunity as well to be connected with a lot of different jobs. Not all of them will be good fits for you. Not all of them you will be a good fit for, but it is connections nonetheless. We had a question come in that is related to this whole decision-making sort of beat that we're on that I wanted to just ask if anyone has any thoughts about this. And it is, have you had to, or did you have to weigh VFA/startups as some sort of like big prestigious opportunity in management consulting, big tech, allied finance, maybe a selective international fellowship, like a Fulbright or something like that? If you had to weigh anything like that, what was going through your mind? Maybe what were some of the trade-offs that you saw with VFA, and then your decision-making process? I see, Jeff, you've come off mute, so I'll let you go first.
Yeah, that scenario is one that I was navigating. It was a choice between an investment banking opportunity, very traditional path, and Venture for America. And I mean, for me, it was really a matter of reflecting on, the experience I had in investment banking before, and thinking about the kind of work, the kind of ownership, the kind of learning opportunities, the kind of even the status or whatever that comes with that. You weigh that against the opportunity with Venture for America, which I saw as one of really a way to get a lot more exposure, responsibility, ownership, and really like a steeper learning curve involved in building a company. The idea of being a cog in a machine was very much an idea that was in my head when I was weighing these two things. And for me, I identified that as something that I was way less excited about going forward. Even, that I'd get paid more doing investment banking than joining a one-person startup. But you have to weigh all these different factors that come with, any opportunities that you have.
Yeah, I think everyone has such different priorities, and that's okay. Like if making a lot more money is important to you in this moment, yeah, like we support that. And startups like cannot necessarily pay you exactly what you're worth because their funds are limited. And part of that trade-off is that, like Jeff said, you do get an opportunity to grow and help to literally build a company. I know Jeff and the other 2016 fellow who worked at that company got a real opportunity to help build the company culture and the values, and just have a lot of say in a way that you wouldn't necessarily be able to do with as much sort of depth at a larger company. So there is a trade-off in terms of the pay, but you also get a lot of things in return. And it's like neither good nor bad. It's just sort of what it is in terms of the startup world and that choice. Adriana or Manisha, did you have to weigh any of these sort of other bigger prestigious opportunities as you're making your choice? And no worries if not, but I wanted to give you an opportunity to speak as well.
I didn't, but I just wanted to kind of add, maybe it's like, this was just my perspective going into it, is I actually, like, personally, when weighing this opportunity versus others, like I was considering VFA the like prestigious opportunity. I felt very like fortunate to kind of be able to like join this program. So I guess this is more like adding, like, there's also like a matter of perspective here. Like it's definitely like each individual, I think, sees each of these opportunities in a different way. So like I would like, the perspective advice I would offer is like, don't feel pressured to like consider one opportunity that like is seemingly, for example, at Georgetown, tech and like big tech and consulting were like heavily marketed, I think, towards a lot of the graduates. And I think that like building my like personal definition of what I consider valuable, it was like just as important. Like I think like those opportunities were great fits for a lot of people, but also yeah, I don't know, like value and importance and prestige is relative. Yeah, just I would keep that in mind.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah, and my old college president once said, prestige can be exhausting. And of course, she's like the president of like a selective college, and was the dean of the college at Duke, and then like had multiple Fulbright scholarships and everything. So I was like, wow, can you really say that? Because you did a lot of those things. But I do agree that it can sometimes be exhausting to be chasing that. And it's okay if you want to do that. But I think for me and for a lot of fellows, the credo of my career as a choice indicates my values. I think resonates because we want our careers to be more than just like what we can put on a resume, but what we're actually doing and how we're spending our time on Earth. All right, so I want to shift gears a little bit and ask a key question that's on some people's mind, which is about salary, cost of living, life on a startup salary that, for an entry-level role. So I'd love to learn more about how you sort of manage to live on a VFA salary, rent, other costs of living. Just help us understand how you're able to make that work. And I know that this can be a sensitive topic, so only share what you're comfortable sharing, but I think it could be really helpful for us to hear about how you did that. Maybe I'll start with Jeff, just in terms of, you're now in a position where you are a founder and you've lived in Cleveland for a number of years now. Would love to hear your thoughts. And also because you traded off an opportunity to work in investment banking. So that's a huge, I'm assuming, financial trade-off. So I'd love to hear about how you're able to make things work. And I will also preface that everyone comes to VFA with different levels of family background in terms of socioeconomic status and wealth. So some people are able to weather those challenges a little bit more than others and have that privilege. But I do think it's worth, I think it's worth mentioning that before we talk about this too. So I'll pass it off to you first, Jeff.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, I guess the most recent experience I have with this was after I finished my fellowship, actually. And I was trying to figure out what to do next afterwards. I ended up with an opportunity to either start this company here in Cleveland or move back to New York, where I actually currently am with my family, to have a more traditional job. And in that exercise, I went through this process of comparing the costs of living and relative salaries of New York City and Cleveland. And I mean, it struck me, but what it came down to was ultimately there was like a 4x different in your purchasing power being in Cleveland relative to New York. And so effectively, if I would have to be paid 4 times as much in New York City as I would in Cleveland, and to maintain really the same quality of life without sacrificing other things. So rent, cost of living, food, travel, all these things taken into account, it boiled down to really a 4x difference, which was way bigger than I anticipated it was going to be. And so the sticker shock that comes with maybe some of the relatively lower salaries that you might find and experience in some of these opportunities in other cities, I think has to be weighed pretty heavily with the flip side of that coin, which is the cost of living in these cities. I mean, again, everyone's situation is different and there are different motivations for different decisions, but I think just kind of baseline, that's good context to have. That you shouldn't just be weighing salary, you should be weighing the other components of that decision as well.
Thanks, Jeff. And one resource that I used when I was thinking about, Cleveland and Detroit and all these other cities was a website called Numbeo, numbeo.com. That can give you a sense of the cost of living for like a gallon of milk or shoes or like coffee or something like that, and rent for like, I think, a 2-bedroom place that can help you gauge how far your dollar might stretch with a startup salary in our cities. Manisha, let's go in the reverse order that we started off with. Any thoughts? I mean, also in Cleveland, any thoughts about how you're able to make living work and on that salary?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, obviously, like, this is just reflective of my own experience. Like, everyone comes from a different place when it comes to this. I think that the biggest so first of all, definitely like reiterating a lot of what Jeff said related to like standard of living in BFA cities is very different, I think, than bigger cities. And as a result, really allows you, I think, to live a life where you can like really like sustain yourself. And in my perspective, but there were trade-offs that I had to make. So while being in Cleveland, working on a VFA salary, I was also paying student loans. And there were just certain things that I had to like, as a trade-off, like have to decide. I knew that on my salary, like with paying student loans, like I wouldn't be able to afford a 1-bedroom apartment on my own. So I decided to live with other fellows, and a lot of fellows decide to do that. And for me, that was like a trade-off that was super worth it because I wanted to like meet new people. And then another thing that I had to really weigh was transportation. Like not all VFA cities are, I think like in general, VFA cities, like one of the standards that they pick in terms of what cities to operate at is like walkability and like ability to get around without a car. But it is true that I think compared to like a very large city, like Cleveland is a lot harder to get around without a car. And I just knew that like I couldn't afford a car and also kind of like take care of all my other financial obligations. So that's a trade-off that I had to make, decide like how was I going to find like a way to get around like effectively and safely. But like I carpooled with a lot of fellows. That was like decisions that I was able to make. And yeah, I think it's really more a decision based on like what your priorities are. Like one thing, I learned a lot about budgeting, which I think was really helpful because I learned to like not feel guilty about like spending my money, because like I spend money to like live a quality life and be able to take care of myself. And yeah, I don't know, like everyone's situation will look different. And I think that like obviously like the things that I spent money on and the things that I owned like look different from like another fellow, and it was just based on like my personal circumstance. But I was able in that way to really rely on the community to, I think, like get around some of like my financial just constraints. But I never felt like I was struggling. I think that I felt like my standard of living was something that like I was very happy with, I think, at the time. And Jeff actually put together an amazing document which like broke down his VFA salary that I used in my first year. And I think like is available to all fellows like on the website. So I highly recommend like leaning on older fellows to kind of hear, like a lot of them are like amazing and very transparent about like kind of how they budget. And that's how I like kind of learned to figure out what would be right for me. So.
Thanks, Manisha. And thank you for being real about the things that you had to consider and your financial priorities as well. And I also appreciate, I think Jeff also did maybe a webinar for our class about how to invest in retirement and stuff like that. And I think, definitely lean on the community, because you're not alone. Like every fellow thinks about these things, I think. And it's helpful to share with other folks. Adriana, I would love to hear from you as well. I saw some head nodding, and I think, earlier naming like that you identify as first generation low income, and that you lead our newest Rise to Venture First for first generation low income fellows. Would love to hear your perspective and how you are your thoughts and what you have to share with the prospective fellows on the call.
Yeah, I would love to. And also, that's awesome that there's a salary breakdown. I don't think I was aware of that. So definitely, I think something I'm learning still is to like lean on older fellows and just, gathering the knowledge that just has been accumulated along the years. Like, I think that's something I'm definitely still learning. And so even being here on this webinar, I like learning more on like how I can, really stretch my dollar for what it's worth. But as to like how I manage that element, I think this is a little bit more unique to just when I joined the fellowship, and might be a little bit more relevant to you all. But I kind of made a decision to also stay home for a little bit longer and like delayed when I would move to a city. I had that as an option. And so I knew kind of from the beginning, and also with everything safety related in mind, I just knew that would earn me and like save me a lot of money. So just looking at when I could just possibly realistically actually have enough money after working for a bit to move and like have those expenses. Because a lot of what I think I wish I had known a little bit earlier on is that there's a lot of upfront costs to moving. So just like relocating to a new city, you know, transportation, how am I going to get there? Like, what will I need? Because other than that, I had just graduated from college and I didn't keep a lot of stuff around. I couldn't. So really just like thinking about all of these things kind of made it so that I could have a plan for when I would be ready. So I think delaying that first initial date of when I would move to a city definitely helped me get a little bit of a cushion. And then I would say, honestly, also surrounding yourself with similar people. And so that's honestly one of the goals. I know Winston just mentioned being a lead for Venture First. So for any fellows identify as low income and first generation, like building a community, like being around people that share the same values with you in money is really important, and something that I kind of gathered through the process of finding roommates. So I knew I wanted to have a roommate, wanted to get that community in, especially because we did a lot of virtual activities. And so I knew that, hey, this is my budget. Like, I don't want to spend this any more than this. And just being kind of honest with who I was interacting with, like what I would be spending my money on, and just like where my priorities lied in that aspect. So I think those two key elements, like moving a little bit later and then being honest with who I would potentially be living with and communicating with about where money kind of fell in my like list of priorities.
That is a great strategy of delaying a move, especially in these sort of remote work times. And most fellows, I think, work at companies that have a remote policy. I think that is creative, and I think that's really resourceful, and something that I might share with 2021 fellows who have that same concern. So thank you. All right, so we have a couple questions that are related to money. So I'll go ahead and ask these because we're on the topic. And some of them I'll just answer and give a preface as well as you think about responses. And we had one question, and that is, are there benefits, healthcare, et cetera, included in every opportunity? Yes, so Venture for America requires our company partners to pay our fellows at a minimum $38,000. And in the class of 2020, out of 210 people, only one person made that. So the median is actually closer to 45,000. But on top of the minimum salary, they are required to provide either healthcare options or a stipend. And the stipend's usually in the case where they're really, really small. Maybe you're like the second hire, and they would just give you like reimbursement or a stipend. And we do have content in the onboarding process to help you better understand offers. I mean, I'm also a first generation college student from a single mother working class background. So I didn't really know a lot of things, and my mom worked at the same family business for her entire life. So I had to learn a lot of these things on our own. And we do have content if you're in that position as well to get up to speed and learn, and we can help you with that when you come to that as well. So hopefully that was helpful. And if you have more questions about that, let me know. And then in terms of the other question, I'm also first generation and low income student, so money is a big concern of mine. Have you ever had the opportunity to negotiate your salary? And if so, do you have any tips or recommendations? So I'll give you all a moment to think about that. What I will say is that we do have also training and expectations and guidelines around negotiation at VFA. That's also outlined in the onboarding content for you as well. So we do provide training and those guidelines and expectations so that you're doing that in good faith. And so that you're doing that with the key point in mind that an opportunity that you might decline or negotiate could also be an opportunity for another fellow. And we've had fellows who negotiated in a way that was not in good faith, and it ended up in that company partner completely withdrawing themselves from the match process. And that opportunity could have gone to someone else. So that's why we have some guidelines, but we also encourage fellows to negotiate if that's something that they choose to do, and have a lot of resources around that too. All right, I don't know if any of you negotiated. I know that in 2016, that was not something that we were encouraged to do. That has obviously changed. We do encourage fellows to negotiate if they want to. So I'd love for any of you to share your thoughts about that.
Yeah, I'm happy to start, and then of course, Adriana and Jeff, please jump in if you have anything to add. So I did negotiate my starting salary, and I would say that part of the reason I did is because I felt like, well, it was really first about assessing what I thought my value was, which is hard to assess because it was my first job ever. So in some ways, I didn't really have market validation to really as a benchmark of oh, this is what I think I'm worth. So it was really kind of an exercise in doing my research, figuring out kind of what are the market values for an entry level product designer in Cleveland. And then another thing is I did have another offer from another company that offered me more, but I wanted to work at the company that I eventually negotiated my salary with. So I think having that reference point for being offered the same role in two different companies was something that I leaned on, but I think in terms of a negotiation strategy is more you use it, I think, as a way to inform your reference point. But you never want to kind of put the company as pitting them, feel like they have to win a bidding war against another company like that. And it's a fine line. And I think that part of, I think, going through that experience was learning how to negotiate, and part of it was really focusing the conversation about what I thought my value was, what my long-term worth was, and less about kind of standard of living and them compared to another offer and things like that. So that's one thing. And then another thing is that there's more than just a salary that you can negotiate. So there were other elements of the offer package that were on the table. For example, I know fellows who've negotiated vacation days or equity, and I think that those are all fair game and things that you can consider. And yeah, I would say also this is another thing about lean on the fellow network. I talked a lot, I think, to VFA staff when I was deciding to negotiate the first time around. And then there's always an opportunity to negotiate further on in your career. So I negotiated again a salary raise after 6 months and then after a year. And I think having in-depth conversations with people in my field in VFA was really important because it gave me the contextual information I needed to have successful conversations. And I would say the best advice I have for that is set expectations early. So I think one of the things that I did that really set me up for success in a negotiation at my first year is that within the first 6 months of my job, I basically let my manager know that I was planning to negotiate at a year. And I don't know if that's a strategy that works for everyone, but it really worked at my company, which had a high trust culture. So that meant that when the conversation came, it wasn't a surprise to my employer. And we were able to have a good kind of conversation from that standpoint. So yeah, I don't know. I hope that helped.
Thank you, Manisha, for sharing your experience with that. Definitely a tough thing. And I do want to name it's always good to reinforce things that fellows are strongly discouraged from leveraging one offer against another company. Especially if you're not planning to accept the offer that you're using to leverage against another company, it's not in good faith. And companies know and talk to each other, and it could put you in a tough situation if both companies decide, you know what, we're just not going to deal with this person and we're going to rescind your offer and go with someone else. And we want you to avoid that as much as possible. So, and more of that is outlined in the content. Adriana, do you have anything that you want to share or anything to add to that, what Manisha said?
Yeah, honestly, I was taking notes as well to set myself up for success once that year mark hits. Because honestly, I think it's something that's a real struggle for a lot of different fellows. And I think during our class, I mean, obviously, context is key. So there weren't enough jobs for the number of fellows when I first started the match process. And so I think that kind of hindered me from thinking of negotiation especially for salary. So I didn't choose to negotiate salary, but I did have a pretty honest conversation about compensation, just like what that structure looked like. So just being a little bit more honest on like what that looked like, if it was realistic. And then also being a little bit more creative about what non-salary things could be added in. So I had asked about if there was like a policy on like laptops. So I was able to just get a new laptop from having those conversations. So when it comes to that, I think it depends on how they are like transparently. I mean, I think I was lucky where like my CEO was super transparent and he was like, do you have any questions? And so whatever wasn't clear, especially like if equity was involved with mine and stock options, which I hadn't seen ever. So like asking those questions once you get to that process could result in you getting more out of it or just understanding better what that looks like.
Thank you. So I'm going to switch gears to another question. And I'm going to ask the question that is the different type of question. And as you think about your responses, I'm going to answer the other questions that are related to money and match. So the question that I want you to think about is, to be honest, VFA actually sounds too good to be true. Have you ever had or heard of a bad experience with Venture for America? I've been trying to ask this question to whomever I can and can never really get a bad answer. Haha. This can mean that VFA is actually really that good, but I'm trying to maintain skepticism and would love any critical perspective to balance out the overwhelmingly positive narratives I've heard. So please be real, because I want people to have a real picture of VFA. And while you are thinking about those responses, someone asked, are there any expenses related to the mandatory programming? No, VFA is essentially a free program. For training camp, we do, like I said, have need-based, application-based stipends. So we want to make it as easy as possible. You might have to pay for like maybe transportation to an event in your city, but that's sort of like a normal expense that you might have if you're living in a city. But almost everything is paid for, and we're able to almost always provide some sort of reimbursement if someone really needs that as well. So hopefully that is helpful. And then there's another question that's sort of related to all these other ones, which is, it seems like there are a lot of guidelines to hold VFA fellows accountable during the match process. Is there anything that holds companies accountable as well? Yes, and we share that with you. So before you get access to match, you sign a match code of conduct, which outlines the ways that we expect fellows to behave. Behave is the wrong word, but expect fellows to interact with company partners in the VFA team, because it is a privilege to be part of VFA and to be able to work with all these companies and to be part of the program. And we hope that you honor that and not jeopardize the sort of a company partnership relationship that could be good for a fellow, which is why we have those in place. But company partners also sign a hiring agreement. I think maybe Jeff, maybe Manisha have seen the hiring agreement. You'll see that too. It'll outline our expectations. And then we also have ways for fellows to report any sort of troubling behavior of companies anonymously, so that we can follow up where necessary and make sure that fellows are able to have a good experience as well. So yes, there are ways that we hold our company partners accountable as much as possible. We aren't, I mean, it's a sort of a gray area as well. Like, we're not their HR, like we are the sort of external figure, but we do have a lot of power over whether or not they have access to fellows during the match program or match process. Alrighty, so that being said, I also want to be sensitive to time. So if you have to run, panelists and participants, feel free to do so. I'll answer as many questions as I can if people have to hop after 6 p.m. Eastern. But I do want to return to that question about a bad experience. I would love for you to share about that as we close out. So I'll let Jeff go first. He came off mute.
Sure, happy to speak to that. So the reality of my VFA experience is that the company that I joined when I started with one other fellow and the founder, it ultimately grew to 50 plus employees, and then it failed, all within the span of really the fellowship. And so coming out of the fellowship, I did not really have like a long-term job prospect. So from that perspective, you could argue, one could make an argument pretty convincingly that is a bad outcome. But I will say that the experience and the support coming out of that from VFA, it was pretty phenomenal. The thing, and maybe this is just in the world of startups, but so yes, I think there are challenges with startups. Most of them will fail, and so that's part and parcel of the process. But what I think makes VFA really special on top of that is that one is that failure in the startup world is actually kind of lauded to a certain degree. Like no one, if you like looking at my resume and seeing a failed startup, if anything is going to help me get a job rather than be like a mark against me, because we tried and people seem truly to respect that within this entrepreneurial space. And the other is that just the VFA community in helping people coming out of situations like that is just ridiculously supportive. Whatever city you are, whatever kinds of connections that you need to make after that, it's truly like an abundance of support and just warmth from the community, which is pretty awesome. I'll add another one though, and trying to be honest, my brother also did Venture for America, and he joined a company, and ultimately the company culture did not quite pan out to what ultimately he had thought it was going to be, and had to transition during the fellowship. And so I think you will see cases of fellows having to leave jobs for a variety of different reasons, and that happens. And again, part of it is the nature of these startups and how small they are and how fast they can grow and how quickly culture can change as a consequence of that. Part of it is the financial reality of these startups. It's very hard to build viable businesses. But I think the experience in most cases is going to be pretty positive, even if the quantifiable result is arguably failure.
Yeah, thank you for sharing about that. It's tough, and I also went through that same thing with the company failing. And if anyone wants to talk one-on-one with that, happy to share about my experience as well. You all have my Calendly link, so I'm always happy to share about that. And I work for VFA, so it can be so bad, and trust me, it was a tough experience, but I also learned something from that too. So maybe it says something about a mindset about learning and what a fellow's disposition is as well. Manisha, I see that you've come off mute. Bad experience.
Yeah, I think I'm trying to think how to formulate this. I think like VFA is a fellowship, but it's also like very decentralized. So most of the fellow experience like is a lot of like just like you're living your life like at your company. And VFA is like a part of that, but it's not kind of like in the forefront, I think, of the entire experience. And so with that, there are a ton of challenges that just come up in life. And VFA like is not really there to kind of like, I guess like prevent those challenges, like those things come up. So I think when I'm reflecting back on my experience, like there were a lot of hard times. And I think that is something I think to recognize, is that it's like, especially if this is like you're going to be your first job out of college, like that transition is very hard. Like I remember transitioning from like writing my papers at 3 a.m. at night to like having to go to a job from like 8 to 5. Like that was a rough transition. I was really tired every day. And I had a very hard time adjusting. I remember my first project that I did, I waited to the last minute, and I eventually had to have my boss like help me like meet the deadline. And I had to work through Christmas, like he had to work through Christmas, and that's like a very humiliating experience. And it is something that is just real. Like life is hard, I think, when you're starting a new job, and those were challenges that I had to face, and at times like really made me have to think a lot about like my competency like really took a hit on my confidence, but also I had to basically move on for that. Like I had to use that as a growing opportunity and be like, okay, like this is how I'm going to improve. So those are challenging and those are bad experiences. Like it's also like I've had coworkers that were incredibly difficult to deal with, that I've had to learn how to work with, and like I've experienced like sexism and racism, like in like multiple aspects, I think, of my experience in Cleveland. And those are real aspects of life that don't stop, I think, despite having like as much support as you possibly can. And yeah, I mean, my company also failed. So like that is also like, I think there is definitely like a representation bias here, because I don't want everyone to think that like all VFA companies fail. My company failed directly as a result of the COVID-19 crisis, because I was in the sports industry. So we literally just like lost all revenue overnight, where we were like a post-profit company, like doing super great, like up until then. But yeah, but again, like there's a reason why I'm volunteering my time like 2 years later here. And there is representation bias. Like this panel has people who like love VFA and like are going to tell you that despite all of those challenges, like despite all of those hardships, like it was still like the best experience of my life. And it really goes back to like, there's only so much VFA can do as an institution, but as far as an institution goes, like VFA is the best institutional support I've ever gotten. Like if I compare it to like my experience at Georgetown, where like I had incredible like personal development challenges and growth, like I did not receive the sort of support that I would have expected. And VFA has like raised my bar in terms of like what I would expect an institution should provide if I were to join it. And I think like part of it is that like VFA has a growth mindset. Like VFA makes mistakes. There are like, when you join the fellowship, you'll see multiple times like staff members, other fellows like making mistakes publicly. And I think that because as an organization, even though VFA is a nonprofit, it operates like a startup, and it has like a very defined set of values. I feel like it has a course of action that it takes every time that it feels like it has room to grow. And I think that that's what really has made the experience great, is not that it's perfect, but that it's like willing to be imperfect and like grow with its fellowship and like use like new people entering the organization to like push it forward. I mean, that's why you see like VFA fellows working for VFA and volunteering their time after the fellowship. So yeah, hope that adds some perspective.
Thank you, Manisha. I think that's insightful and powerful, and I appreciate you sharing. Yeah, life, VFA or not, is hard, and you've got to deal with things for sure. Adriana, I'd love for you to share anything that you think as well on this topic.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot was covered, and I agree with a lot of what was said, but you know, kind of being the thick of it, I would agree, it's hard, it's tough, and I wouldn't want to I guess like sugarcoat that part of it. I mean, I think you have a lot of people who are going through the same thing, and so you know, getting access to a bunch of people that are going to go through that same difficult experience is so beautiful and powerful. But I'd say in my situation as well, like that community element is still something that I'm like looking forward to grow. I haven't really met a lot of my cohort, and also part of like a more challenging situation, like not really seeing them in person for training camp. And so I know there's so many people that are going through it together, but you know, really being at a remote situation, like that's just, it's not the same. I wouldn't say it's the same. But with the small, there are definitely areas where you are going to be building community. And so with the people I am connected with, like I think keeping in touch with them and like kind of just telling them about my day and like how hard it is, how I don't really know what I'm doing half the time, but knowing that that's a common experience is where I find a lot of reinsurance. But yeah, I know there's going to be a lot of growth at what I'm doing, and just reminding myself through those challenging work days, like when I'm putting in a lot of hours, you know, just having that in the back of my mind. But yeah, I'd say it's tough. It's not easy. But really, it's also really rewarding. I think if that's something that you're looking for, being honest with yourself, like, is this something that I want to do? Like, do I want to have a lot of responsibility? Do I want to have ownership of things? Because that's something I can say from just the start of my first week or 2 weeks is like I had real responsibility, which is a challenge, but also is really rewarding. So I think those were questions that I kind of had for myself before I accepted the offer, or even as I was applying to the fellowship, knowing if that was something that I would be comfortable with experiencing, and if that was something that I wanted for myself. So just reflecting on that.
Yeah, thank you. And we had a question earlier about how close you're able to feel to other fellows through the virtual programming like training camp. I was wondering if you could touch a little bit about that as well, just because we're on the topic of training camp and virtual and community in this sort of Zoom digital world. So if you have anything to share about how you're building relationships, whether you're able to do that during training camp and then afterwards, that would be great as well.
Yeah. So I think definitely have like making the most of virtual training camp because everyone's all there, like having to be there. I think building a lot of like those groups, like there's a bunch of group meets that kind of came and formed out of that. And so honestly, even though we weren't in person, there was a lot of online hyperactivity. So there was a lot of memes going on. There was just like a lot of communication that was going offline that honestly I think helped bloom a different type of just like community relationship, which I learned to value after training camp was over. But I'm not sure if goal setting groups are going to be a thing again for training camp, but that was a really good idea. I will say that like having a small group that met regularly was a really good launching pad for just being engaged with fellowships and like doing a house credo, like just having scheduled FaceTime that wasn't in like a large setting really helped get to know a little bit more with my fellows.
Absolutely. And I know that, so the leader of training camp is also in Jeff and my class, a 2016 alum, and she really cares about the experience and like dedicates so much for time thinking about how to create a really positive experience for all the fellows. Unfortunately, I'm seeing a question about whether or not training camp could be in person this year, and the answer is no. We made that decision back in January with what we knew, and as literally a 2-person team that plans training camp, it's hard to plan in person and virtual. We're not a university with many, many millions of dollars to test everyone and do everything like that. So unfortunately, we're not able to pivot that quickly. So unfortunately, even with vaccines and the hope of returning to somewhat of a normal state in the summer and the fall, it's just, we do want to act out of an abundance of caution. And thank you, Adriana, for sharing more about that. I do, again, want to be sensitive of everyone's time. So prospective fellows, if you have to leave, feel free to do so. There's absolutely no penalty, and same with panelists as well. But I'm going to stay on for a little bit longer to continue answering all the great questions that we have. And if you're on here, I might lob them over to you as well. All righty, so maybe I'll just go down some of the lists. So we had some questions about, thank you, Riel, for joining as well. We really appreciate you being here and being familiar face with all the prospective fellows. So take care, have a great evening. All right, so how does VFA curate startups? Do you take some kind of fee in return for sourcing talent? That's a great question. So I would not say that we fully vet companies. That's language that we avoid using just because I'm not gonna know everything there is to know about campus ESP where Adriana works. I mean, now that we have a few fellows working there, we know a lot, but for new companies, we can't know everything. We're not a venture capital firm. They're not going to open up their profit and loss statements, everything to us. So we rely on the information that they provide us. That said, we do look for roles where fellows do have responsibility, where the leadership is aligned with our mission and understands what we're doing as a nonprofit organization, and at a baseline, the company values and what we can gauge as their culture. And we also, if it's possible, try to get a sense of their reputation in the city as well. In terms of fee in return for sourcing talent, we do take a placement fee that that company partners pay if they do hire a fellow, and that is less it's not a recruitment fee. And I know that some people might say, like, oh, that's kind of weird. Why does VFA do that? It really is basically kind of like a donation to help offset the costs of training, supporting all of our fellows. So they do pay just based on their location. But if they're a fellow-founded company, so like Jeff, for example, would probably not pay that just because we love our fellow founders and love when they hire our fellows. So hopefully that is helpful. And it also outlined in the hiring agreement that you'll receive if at the point that you get access to Match as well. There was another question about Match, about how many opportunities there will be. So we're probably gonna have a class of 200, a little more than 200 fellows again this year. And we are planning to at least have as many opportunities as there are fellows. Last year, and Adriana mentioned like there are fewer jobs than there are fellows last year, and that is because Matt started on May 18th. It was supposed to start on April 6th. And if you think back to a year ago, no company had any idea what was happening, and they were just sort of trying to survive. So, and that's the context for why that happened in 2020. But this year, with things more stabilized, we do expect to have as many opportunities as there are fellows. And we'll continue to add opportunities as the spring goes on. So I know that panelists, you're not really getting a chance to answer these, but I just wanted to do sort of the logistical housekeeping things for in terms of these questions. Have fellows left in the middle of the fellowship, particularly with challenges of the pandemic? Yes, that does happen. So for a variety of reasons, and all of them are confidential, so I won't share like any particular names or stories, but fellows do leave in the middle of the fellowship for a variety of reasons. It's not ideal. When you sign your offer letter, we hope and expect that you're going to be here for the full 2 years because it's an investment in you. It could have been an opportunity for someone else. So we really hope that when if you do sign, that you're committing to being a fellow for the full 2 years. But it does happen, and there's no like retribution or penalty. I mean, at the end of the day, if someone's really unhappy at their company and they really don't want to live in a VFA city anymore, it's not fun for us, but we respect it and don't want someone to sort of be unhappy and harmed just for the sake of being a fellow if they really don't want to be in that position. So we understand it's a conversation that you'll probably have with the community director of your city and our programs team here at VFA, should that come to pass. And ideally it won't, but life, like Manisha said, throws a lot of things at you, and we try to be as compassionate and empathetic as possible. All right. One of the things that someone's looking for is a lot of ownership over work, and the biggest worry is that this won't be true, especially being a new recent college grad and an entry-level employee. So I know, Adriana, you just said, I got a lot of responsibility day one. So I would love to hear about how much responsibility that you had when you first started out, and if you're ever in a position where like you just felt like you didn't have enough responsibility. I'm guessing all of you had a lot of responsibility just based on when you joined your companies, but would love to hear any tidbits about that as well.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I think a little helpful context. So I went to liberal arts college, didn't really have a specific degree that set me up to go one particular path in terms of like role. And so I really did feel like, a bit worried about, am I going to be able to do whatever is needed? And my major also was kind of ambiguous and like didn't really have that direction either. But I think from the beginning, like I had maybe a 2-week period of training. And so there was a moment where like I was kind of familiar with like what was going on, what we were doing, sat in on a couple of like shadow calls. But after we did an internal like demo for me to just replicate what a call would look like with a customer, I was kind of just thrown into the deep end of like, here you go, like this is your new this is like your new account, and like you're gonna help them on board. And I kind of made a mistake at the beginning. I felt so nervous going in, but honestly, I think after doing that for a bit and being honest with like my managers about how I felt and like where I needed support, I was able to do a lot of that work and anything else that was kind of needed. Like whenever a new project came up that I was particularly interested in, I would mention to them, hey, like, is this something that I can help with? Can I sit in on that meeting? And so being balanced with like what was needed of me, and then being aware of like what was out there externally from like what my role was. I was pretty vocal about what I was interested in, like where I wanted to learn and grow, and they were really aware of that and like really receptive. So I think being vocal about what I'm interested in kind of helped me gain that responsibility and that ownership. And so now I'm kind of this person that they know I like to take on tasks, and as they come, I've kind of been able to build more and more on that. Still get really nervous, but you know, being comfortable with that feeling is like probably one of the biggest benefits of working at a startup.
Yeah, more often than not, you're probably going to be thrown into the deep end at a startup, especially if it's on the smaller end of things. So I think it's a valid concern, but I think it's something that is unlikely to happen, especially because it's a startup, and also something that you can gauge when you're interviewing with companies. As much as they're interviewing you, you should also ask questions about, you know, what does success look like in this role? If I were like, what does a successful person do in this role? What does that success look like? Can help you gauge a little bit more about those responsibilities and how much of that you would have. Manisha or Jeff, anything to add about responsibilities or lack thereof in your job at VFA, through VFA?
Yeah, I can add a bit. I mean, part of the whole allure to me was the maybe overwhelming amount of responsibility that I was trying to get from the role that I was looking for with VFA. And so with that comes, you know, joining a company as the first person, you know, no training, but a lot of trial by fire and a lot of responsibility to learn things as they transpire in real time, because you have to, and there's no one else to to figure those problems out. So it's like, I think it's very dependent on the kind of company and the stage that they are at in their life cycle, what kind of training versus on the job responsibilities and learnings you'll find. But again, I think based on what you're looking for, if you're looking for more structured training versus you know, more open-ended trial by fire, if you will, you can find those kinds of opportunities.
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, especially those small companies. And we just did a webinar today that if you become a fellow, you'll have access to where the fellows worked at. Sticks, a fellow founded company where there's 6 people, and then Bundle, a company in Charlotte that has 2 people. So if you want to learn more about that before the match process starts, that's a really good resource. And then the next question is about sort of, I think these questions are related because it's about life if you don't do VFA, professionally and also in terms of where you live. And I think, Adrian, I'm forgetting where you grew up, but I know, Jeff, you're from New York, Manisha grew up in the Bay Area, and I'm from Seattle. And we all ended up in the Midwest or VFA cities. So how did you feel your experience, like with that in mind, how did you feel your experience would be different if you ended up working in a city like SF or NYC, Boston, also in my own hometown, Seattle as well? Do you have any thoughts about that experience looking back?
Yeah, I can take a stab at this, especially because I actually relocated to San Francisco. So that's where I am right now. So I can kind of let you know the differences. But part of the reason why out of college I knew for sure I didn't want to go back, I think, to a larger city, is it's specifically, I think, related to startups and related to like the Bay Area culture around startups, is that I felt like the cultural aspect of startups in the Bay Area was like not something I identified with from like a value standpoint. I felt like people were very like the VC culture here and the fundraising culture here is like, I think like 4 years ago was just not one that I felt like welcome in, and not really one that I felt like I don't know. I just like, I didn't like vibe with it. And I thought that building for the sake of building was just not ethical. And I felt I really resonated with how VFA supported companies that were building in like communities that were growing their startup culture. So I really wanted to learn about like a different perspective on building, just because I think that SF, New York, like they're all very like established sort of like tech centers that have like a specific vibe to them. And I think that with that came like working at the startup culture in Cleveland, an incredible opportunity to be almost like a big fish in a small pond, where not only was I working at my startup, I was also learning about the entire startup culture of Cleveland. Like I met all of our investors, and I was constantly like connecting with different designers in the city, and just got to kind of hear like how Cleveland wanted to, from an infrastructure standpoint, like build startup culture within the community. And I thought that was really valuable because it allowed me to kind of like develop my own opinions about kind of like how to build ethically and how to build effectively. Because it's so easy, I think, to like when you're in I don't know, I felt intimidated by like SF startup culture. I was like, there's people who know way more than I do about like fundraising and VCs and equity and like all this like random stuff. And I felt like being in a VFA city really helped me build my confidence around that, because I was like, okay, like I can ask questions, I can kind of be central, I think, to a mission that is like on a city level, like very important. And you'll hear probably from other fellows like mentioned this, like a lot of fellows are very involved with like the city councils that they live in. And I think part of it is that like VFA works very closely with like these cities' missions to kind of like grow financially and grow their job market. So that part's very cool. And then obviously from like now moving back to San Francisco, like I think there's been a lot like of a part of that move was kind of like forced due to the pandemic, but it's interesting kind of coming back because I feel like I just have a lot more confidence. I'm like, no, I feel like my perspective on what I think is right or wrong, like is a lot clearer to me. And I feel like I can judge sort of like, I don't know, if I have a call with like someone who wants to like join the company or has an opinion on how we should build, or if someone says something on Twitter, like in Bay Area tech news that like people are praising, I can be like, no, like I disagree with that and this is why. So sorry, that was really long-winded, but
I think it gave us a good window into what it's like as you're living in San Francisco, which is the quintessential sort of startup place. And you have that experience in Cleveland. So I think that's helpful. Adrian, do you have anything to add about not living in a big hub?
Yeah, so I'm also from New York City, and so I kind of like grew up in pretty much like, yeah, the power center. I think it's like someone described it, but I guess I'm a little bit, there's a lot of different reasons that fellows join VFA. Like, I think that's something that'll be really clear as you just talk to different fellows. People are really aligned to it versus if they want to really like gain that networking experience, like understand what startups are, have an impact, like just have a way better understanding of how that works and like how they can build their own startups using VFA as like a launch pad. I think others are definitely more value oriented and mission oriented. So really believe in like what VFA's mission is doing. And so I think, I don't know where I would fall. I think all of it kind of like really makes sense with me, but I really was geared more towards like mission and value. Like I had been a part of programs since I was probably in middle school, and so I really appreciated what programs like we're trying to do and like investing in the cities economically and driving their growth. So I was really attracted to that, and I felt like what I had known from like college and like what these cities offered in terms of employment. I mean, a majority of my friends really did do big companies and big names in these cities, and so I knew I didn't really want to do that, at least not from the start. Like I have the rest of my career to try and do that, but I knew from the start like that wasn't really what I wanted to do. It wasn't a good fit for me, and so this felt like a nice middle ground of what I wanted to do, like how I could impact from for-profit companies, startups, but also like have social impact in like cities, being invested in it, like being involved with it. So I'd say for me, it was more of like a character perspective on like why I wanted to do this. And that's just kind of what called out to me. And like, I feel really confident in my decision because like me weighing what that meant for me.
Thank you. Thank you so much, the both of you, for sharing. Yeah, the experience is definitely different than if you were to move to a big city, and like the people that go to our college, the colleges that the three of us went to, stay in DC or go to, like, literally, I can't go to New York and not run into someone unintentionally from my college. And I know that the pull is there for a lot of people, but I think there's something just special about a VFA city where there's a sense of purpose. Like, people are there not just for themselves. I mean, in a lot of ways, a lot of this is self-serving, but I think people move to Cleveland or Detroit or Philly because they want to be a part of the city's growth and change. And that's not something that you might find. Like, people don't move to San Francisco to work at a startup for San Francisco, right? Like, I don't know anyone who does that. Maybe if you're from San Francisco. Um, but that is something that I think is really special and unique to VFA. I think that's all the time we have for the questions, because I want to be super sensitive of how long this has been, and I really appreciate you, Manisha and Adriana and Jeff, for staying as long as you have, and for all the prospective fellows who were on this today. I hope it was helpful. If there are any questions that were not answered that you really want to know about, please reach out to me. I'm here to be a resource for you over the next 10 days or so as you get to make your decision. And we're excited about the prospect of you joining, but we want to make sure you're making the best decision for yourself as well. So thank you all so much for joining. It was so great to see you again, Adriana, Manisha, and then Jeff, who's already left. But it was so great, and I love seeing you all interact and to share more about your experience. I think that it was powerful for me, and hopefully it was powerful for everyone who's watching as well. So thank you all so much, and have a good evening.